We continue in Hilchot Talmud Torah, Rambam, Perek Aleph, Halacha Zayin or Halacha Waw, depending on the edition. So Rambam writes as follows. מאמתי מתחיל אביו ללמדו Torah? We said earlier, if you recall, in Halacha Aleph at the beginning, we said Nashim wa'avadim peturim mitalmud Torah. Here we are. I'm sharing the screen with you now. At the beginning of the perek, we said Nashim wa'avadim peturim mitalmud Torah. Aval katan aviu hayav lelamedo Torah. So the Rambam began the perek and began these halachot of Talmud Torah with the statement that the father is obligated to teach his son Torah. So here Rambam continues and adds further detail to this statement. When does this chova begin? At what age? From the moment that the child begins to speak, which is very young. In some cases, it might be before, even well before the age of 2. But certainly from the age of 2 or a little bit afterwards, a child can begin to form words. And at that point, already there is a chova, certainly a bit older than that, when a child can repeat a sentence or a few words which he hears. At that point, the father teaches him, Torah siwa lanu Moshe. This is the first statement of Torah that the child hears. So when he wakes up the child in the morning, or when he puts him to sleep in the evening, he teaches him this pasuk. Melamado Torah siwa lanu Moshe morasha kehilat Yaakov. That is the pasuk from Sefer Devarim. Ufasuk rishon mi parashat Shema, and also the first pasuk of parashat Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. V'ahar kach, and as time goes on, melamado ma'at pesukim. So the beginning of Talmud Torah is learning by rote certain fundamental pesukim. Ad sheyeh ben shesh or ben sheva. Until the child is approximately 6 or 7 years old. Lefi burio. Burio means according to his ability. Molicho esel melamed hatinokot. And at that point, what usually happens is the father, because he cannot spend his entire day or much of his day teaching his son, it was normal, as we know from what Hazal tell us, there was an ancient takana to have a melamed tinokot in every town, in every village. So a person that was known in Yiddish, for example, as the melamed, and his job was to teach the children Torah, which means, as we shall see, to teach them Tanakh. So the father at that point takes his child to the Talmud Torah, to the melamed. And Rambam continues, Halacha Heth or Zayin, Hayat Minhag HaMedina, Nikah Melamed HaTinokot Sachar, if the minhag of that place, or that locality, in that locality, is that the Melamed Tinokot is paid to teach the children, Nothen or Sacharo, then the father is required to pay this amount that is normal, that is customary. You might ask, how can it be that the teacher is not paid? Well, it really depends on the circumstances. Sometimes it might be an older person who was essentially retired, no longer working, but very capable of teaching young children Tanakh. Keep in mind, of course, that in those days, the books from which they learned Torah, to the extent that they had books readily available, if we're talking about Tanakh, they were almost certainly not menukadim. There were no vowel signs, no ta'amim. So this melamed had to know the nikud, the vocalization of the words, the dots and the dashes, and he also had to know the ta'amim, which is the pisuk, the punctuation, the division of the text, each sentence, each phrase. So it has to be, at the very least, a person who is baki, a person who is baki, at least in the Tanakh. Otherwise, he cannot teach. And this frequently could be an older person, an older man who no longer needs to work, and therefore also doesn't perhaps demand any payment. But if it was the case that such teachers were paid, then the father must pay. In other words, this hovah of teaching the son Torah is also a financial obligation, usually. And the father is required to continue paying for his child's tuition. The hovah of teaching Torah, as we said, begins with the Tanakh. Torah shebichtav kula, all 24 books of the Tanakh. And the father's hovah is to provide for his son a framework in which he will cover the entire Tanakh. So if the father himself has the time and the ability, then he can do so. It's his responsibility. And if not, then there should be a melamed tinokot. There should be a teacher and a schoolyard, a school room. There must be some place where the children are taught Torah. And this obligation devolves on the father. And Rambam writes in his Perush on the Mishneh. So in the Mishneh, Masechet Nadarim, Perek Revi'im, the Mishneh discusses Mudar Hanaya. In other words, a person who took who stated a nether, a vow, not to benefit from another person. For example, they're very angry. They are the relationship between them is on the rocks at this point, and he decided to state, I will not learn from this person. I will not benefit, rather, I should say, in any way. And so therefore we have the question of what kind of things may he do for the other person, and what kind of things may that person do for him. So Rambam, the Mishnah states, "Umelamado midrash halachot v'agadoth." In other words, he is allowed to benefit from this person in the sense that he may learn Torah from him. So we have midrash halachot v'agadoth. Midrash is something is the midrash halacha, something like Mechilatha the Rabbi Ishmael or Mechilatha the Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai or Sifrei Devarim or Bamidbar, Torah Kohanim, Sifra on Vayikra. That is midrash, where the pesukim are studied and examined and dissected, and halachic conclusions are drawn. That's called midrash, not what people generally refer to as midrash nowadays, which is what we're about to see in a moment. Halachot is what you would call today Mishnah. In other words, brief, succinct statements of Torah Ba'al Peh, which is what we have in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the term for the entire body of the Mishnah, the Shisha Sedarim, the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Each Seder is divided into Masechtot, each Masechet into Parakim, and each Parak into Halachot. Halachot is a statement of Halacha, such as, there are 39 Avot Mulacha on Shabbat. That Reshima, that statement of that concept is a Halacha. So we have Midrash, Halachot, Agadoth, and Agadoth is what people generally refer to today as Midrash, because that's Midrash Agadah. So as the term is not completely incorrect, both are Midrash, but generally Chazal use the expression Midrash with reference to Midrashay Halacha, and Agadah with reference to Midrashay Agadah or Haggadah, and that is Mutar. And this is because teaching Torah was not done for payment. However, the Mishnah goes on, Lo yelamadan o mikra, ava melamedhu eth bano mikra. In other words, this person is not supposed to benefit from this other person, and therefore he should not be taught mikra, that is Tanakh, by this person. And Rambam says in his Perush on the Mishnah here, the makom shemelamadim mikra b'sachar. In other words, here there is a hana'ah mamashith, there is a tangible benefit that he gains from studying Tanakh from this person, because this is something usually that you pay for. So he is gaining benefit which can be expressed in monetary terms, and that is asur, because he is mudar hanaya from this person. He has taken a nether not to benefit from this person. So normally mikra was taught b'sachar, for pay, but Rambam continues, but in a place where it is customary to teach mikra b'hinam, mutar lo lelamado mikra. And there he is allowed to study mikra, learn mikra from this person. And Rambam adds in his Perush on the Mishnah here, why it was mutar, why it is mutar for this person to teach him midrash halachot v'agadot. He says, "Lefi she'lo mutar lelamed miksa' mimiksaot ha'chochmat ha'torah b'sachar." It is not mutar to teach Torah Ba'al Peh for pay. But Rambam continues, "Aval mutar lelamed et ha'mikraot b'sachar b'makom shenahu b'chach." But it is mutar to teach Tanakh, Mikra, for pay, where this is the practice normally. Mitoch kawana sheyeh oto sachar limud ha'ta'amim u'sachar shemilat ha'tinokot shelo ya'azvu v'yitkalkalu. In other words, teaching mikra for pay is mutar. Rambam says it is because the pay is for limud ha-ta'amim, the teaching of the ta'amim, which is not, first of all, teaching the actual words themselves, but something more technical, if you like, to know how to divide the text. And also, Sachar Shemirat HaTinokot. After all, this teacher has to look after the children. He's in charge of them. He's responsible for them. So it's a kind of kindergarten or primary school also. And therefore the pay can be construed and seen as being for that purpose, in payment for that service. And Rambam adds something important here. He writes, the children need to be watched over and supervised. They cannot be left to their own devices. Says Rambam. In other words, children require supervision and direction. Otherwise, it is very possible that they will develop in the wrong direction. They will be influenced and learn the wrong kinds of things. So this is the purpose. One of all these various ideas are part of the reason and the purpose for sending the children to the Melamed Tinokot. So Rambam, we pick up again in this halakha, which is halakha taif or zayin still. Machon Shilo lelamed Torah shebichtav b'sachar, where it is the custom to do so, to teach Torah shebichtav b'sachar, or pay mutar lelamed b'sachar. Aval Torah sheba'al peh asur lelamedha b'sachar, but mutar sheba'al peh, it is a sort to teach for sachar, for money. Shenema re'eh limati atchem. Chazal would doresh this pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu states to Am Yisrael, re'eh limati atchem. Behold, I have taught you. Ma ani bechinam lamati, af atem bechinam lamatem mimani. As I myself learnt from Hashem, I was taught bechinam, without payment. Af atem bechinam lamatem mimani. You too have learned from me bechinam. V'chen keshetelamedu ledorot, and so it shall be for all time. Bechinam kamo shelamatem mimani. And in this place, in the Mishnah, in the Perush on the Mishnah, Rambam that we mentioned in Masechet Nedarim, amongst other places, Rambam draws on this point about not receiving payment for teaching Torah. But this is also a broad subject which has been and must be discussed in much greater length, and we won't go into that now. But so, without a doubt, this is how things were, and this is how things ideally should be. Rambam continues, Halakha Yod, or in other editions still, Halakha Zayin, Lo nasa misha yelamedo bechinam. If a person cannot find someone to teach him Torah for free, let's say we're talking about Torah Bichtav apparently, Yilmod b'sachar, he should, Torah Ba'al Peh, apparently we're discussing. Lo nasa misha yelamedo bechinam. There's no one who will teach him for free, even though it should be so. Yilmod b'sachar, he should learn even if he has to pay. Shenemar emet keneh, the pasuk in Mishneh states or implies that a person should make every effort to learn and be aware of the truth and therefore study Torah, no matter what it takes. And if this was the case, you might think that if he had to pay to study Torah, he may also teach others Torah in the same fashion for payment. Talmud Lomar wa'al timkor. But the pasuk goes on to say, buy or purchase or acquire truth, Torah, but do not sell it. Torah should not be viewed as a business. It is not a business. It is the lifeblood. It is the very essence of the Jewish people. And something of such centrality and such importance cannot be a commodity. Rambam continues, Halacha Yod Aleph or Het, Kol Ish Yisrael Hayav B'Talmud Torah. Every Jew is required to study Torah. Ben Ali, Ben Ashir, whatever his financial state or status is, Ben Shalem Berufo, Ben Ba'ali Surim, whether he is healthy and in every way, or he's a Ba'ali Surim, he is ill or suffers some disability. Nevertheless, he is required to study Torah. Ben Bahur, whether he's young, Ben Shaya Zaken Gadol Shetashash Koho, or whether he is very old and very weak. Afilu Aniham Hazer al Pathahim, even a person who is so poor that he goes from door to door, from household to household, to ask for a small amount of money or food for himself or for his family. Even such a person, وَأَفِيلُ بَعَلْ إِشَاءُ الْغَنِيمِ, and even if he has a family and he is weighed down by economic concerns and obligations, حَيَاوْ لِكَبُعَ لَهُ الزَّمَانِ لِتَلْمُودِ التَّوْرَاةِ. He is required to make a time, set aside a time every day to study Torah. Bayom uvalayla. And that time should also be divided between the day and the night. Shene'emar v'hagitha bo yomam v'layla, as it states at the beginning of Sefer Yoshua. It doesn't mean to study Torah all day and all night, which is wonderful if a person can do so, but that is a very rare circumstance and reality if a person can do that. But he must set aside time regularly to study Torah, and that study should occur both during the day and during the night. Halacha Yod Bet. Gadolei Chachmei Yisrael hayu mehen chotovei itzim. Among the great Chachamim who are mentioned in the Mishneh, in the Talmud, we find, says Rambam, that there were those amongst them who, in terms of their livelihood, they performed very simple and not particularly prestigious work, such as being chotovei itzim, hewers of wood, people who would go into the forest or the scrub and collect firewood and bring it to the marketplace to sell. Umihen sho'avei mayim, and there were amongst them those who were water drawers, who carried water from the well to houses in large buckets. Umehen somim, and there were amongst them those who were blind. Today it's difficult to believe that a person who is blind could study much in the way of Torah. Certainly before there were books in Braille, and even then you don't have all the text that you might want in Braille. But the truth is that much of the study of Torah was done Ba'al Peh. And so studying Torah was quite possible. More difficult, yes, but definitely possible. Even for a person who was blind. And despite the financial situation and the various difficulties, these people studied Torah during the day and during the night. And some of these people mentioned in the Mishneh, the Talmudim, are amongst the most important of the Hachamim mentioned in those texts. Literally those who received and passed on the Masarot of Torah Ba'al Peh, Ish mipi Ish mipi Moshe Rabbeinu, from one generation to the next, from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rambam is stressing these facts in order to demonstrate and in order to encourage every individual that he must study Torah. And this is an essential and a fundamental part of being Jewish, simply put. And there are no exemptions. Rambam continues, Halacha Yod Gimel or Yod in other Sfarim, other texts, Ademathai Hayav Lilmod Torah. So a person might say, well, I've been studying Torah since I was 5 years old, and now I'm 55, so perhaps I no longer have to study Torah. No, that is not so. The person is required to study Torah Ad Yom Mutho, as long as he is able to do so, to his last days. Shneimar ufen yasuru milvavecha kol yimei hayacha. The Torah is hard to gain, but it's very easy to lose. As Chazal say in Avot Rabbi Natan, Divrei Torah like kelez zechuchit, which vessels, items made of glass. In those days, such things were very expensive. Chashim liknoth kizchuchit, v'noach la'abedan kizchuchit. It is also very easy to lose them. They break very easily, and then you are without that vessel. The same is true of Torah. Torah is something that you require constant. It requires constant study. The person requires, as it were, always requires a booster shot of Torah on a daily basis. It is also the nature of the human being, as the Maharal explains in a number of places, that it is seen that the Torah is a system which derives from an exterior, outside source. In other words, what I mean by that is that the Torah, as we know, as the Mishneh states in Perek Helek in Masechet Sanhedrin, Torah is min hashamayim. That is to say, it is not It is not a part of nature. This is a very important point to understand. There is nature, and there is Torah, there is Yahadut. The world of nature, the natural world, the world of material things, is one form of reality. And over the millennia, we have come to understand the world of material things in greater depth. So we know today, for example, that the material world is made up of molecules and atoms, etc., and they are constantly in motion, right? If you're sitting at a table, as I am right now, the atoms inside the wood of the table, shall we say, are actually constantly in motion. If you take a glass of water and you examine it under very high power microscopy, then you see that everything is moving. This was famously one of the proofs or the proof essentially that Albert Einstein adduced to prove the existence of atoms, which is people not all people know, but just 120 years ago was not recognized universally, and it's certainly not been considered to be proven that atoms even exist. And then he explained that the fact that you can see the motion within water, shall we say, when they would take grains of pollen, which are very, very fine, and throw them into water, and then observe them under a high-power microscope, and you would see that the grains of pollen are constantly being buffeted and moved. They're not at rest. And Einstein said that's because everything there is moving. The atoms, the molecules, they're all in motion, and therefore these grains are being buffeted. So that's the natural world. The natural world is not the world of life, by the way. That is the world of physics, but it's not biology. Biology is the world of living organisms. Living organisms require external information. They require input from outside the system, the natural material system, in order to create life. And that's DNA, which is information. It's like the software for a computer. It's essentially the same thing. So the world of material items, the base world of material, does not include that information to create life. Life, to create any kind of functioning organism, to create proteins, for example, there has to be information which codes for certain proteins, which provides the instructions for various molecules to self-organize in a certain manner, which creates systems and structures which create what we call life. So you have the material world, and you have the information which allows that material world, the inanimate material, to become animate, to become alive. Now you take the living world of the animate world of organisms, in which you also have human beings, to exist without the system of nature, or the natural order of living things, to be on a different level. You again require external input. You require a particular kind of information. If a person does not have such information, as we said not long ago, we quoted from Rambam's Perush on the Mishneh Nedarim, then the children, if left to their own devices, will be mitkalkel. They will go wrong. They will go off the derech. In order to keep them on the correct path, which has to be a straight and narrow path, that requires information. That requires structure. That requires direction, which comes from without, not from within. It's the very opposite of what some people claim nowadays, that, children have to be allowed to do whatever comes naturally. Well, no one's trying to create unnatural and abnormal children, but it's necessary to understand that for children to become normal and to become civilized, and that's just to be civilized in the general human sense, and even how much more so to become civilized in the Torah sense, that requires a lot of direction and care and supervision, and all of that has to come from without. Studying Torah is injecting into the system, into this living organism, information and instruction, which comes from without, from beyond the borders, beyond the parameters of physics and beyond the parameters of biology. If a person is left to their own devices, then they are closer to an animal than to what a human being should be. And this is precisely what Rav Kook states. It's quoted in Sefer Oroth. It's a brief statement, and many would consider it a radical statement, but that's precisely perhaps why it is so fundamentally and obviously true. Rav Kook writes there that the difference between Am Yisrael, between the Jewish people and their civilization, which is based on the Torah, which is of course based on an input from without the system. It's not a human invention, it's min hashamayim. The difference between Am Yisrael and Umot HaOlam is greater than the difference between Umot HaOlam and the animal kingdom. So Rav Kook writes. It's a good thing that the Supreme Court has either not been made aware yet of that particular statement in Sefer Oroth. It would probably by now be banned, and whoever might be considered responsible might be sitting in jail. But there you have it. That's what Rav Kook writes. To a Torah Jew, this should not be considered to be surprising or unusual or extreme. That is what Rav Kook writes. Why is that? It's not just some. It's not a racist statement in the base sense of that word. It is a statement based on a recognition and understanding that Umot HaOlam do not have, the nations of the world do not have such a system of external information, as it were, a kind of spiritual DNA, which codes for certain kinds of behavior and knowledge, and therefore creates a certain kind of culture and civilization. And when people do not have that, then they remain in the world of biology, and that is the focus of their life is that of biology, economic concerns and constraints and all the various aspects of living organisms that wish to attain and achieve their needs, their desires. That is the world of biology. If you wish to exist beyond the world of biology, we lived in the world of biology, but we also we are also designed and supposed to be living on an additional separate plane, which is beyond that world of biology, of simple organic existence. And that comes only from something which is outside that system, which is beyond, and that is the Torah. For this reason, we find, as I said, the Maharal mentions that the Maharal didn't speak about physics and biology, but which were not really understood at all in the same way at that time, 500 odd years ago. But Maharal does explain that studying Torah and retaining Torah is very difficult because it comes from a different plane, from a different level of reality. And therefore, it requires constant hazara, constant to revise, to review, to go over what you've learned, to constantly repeat and study more, and not be detached from the Torah. Without that, even if a person has studied a great deal, it will easily be lost and forgotten, because the nature of the biological world is of a different nature. The essence of the biological world, of the organism, is of a different nature, different order of being, of magnitude, as compared to the spiritual content of the Torah. And they do not very easily mix. It's like a bit like oil and water. They don't mix very well. You have to constantly, if you want oil and water to exist in a mixed form, then you constantly have to stir. You constantly have to mix away, so that even then they do not completely bind the molecules, but they can be mixed together, generally in a rough sense, the water and the oil. But if you leave them alone for a time, they will separate completely. That is how it is with the study of Torah. And therefore, Rambam says, and the Pasuk says, I return now to Halacha Yod Gimel, Ad Ematai Hayav Limod Torah, Ad Yom Moto. All one's life one has to study Torah. Shene'emar ufen yosuru milvavecha kol yemei hayecha, because it is likely the natural tendency and reality is that these things will slip away from you unless you are constantly mixing away with the oil and the water. Says Rambam, and if a person is not constantly studying and learning and going over things, he will forget. That is the nature of the beast. That is the reality of the human being. Rambam continues. Continuation of Halacha Yod Gimel or Halacha Yod Aleph, Hayav l'shalesh Zaman lamidatho, and a person is required to divide his study of Torah on a daily basis, as Rambam is about to explain, to organize his time and his study into 3 sections. The shalesh zaman lamidatho. Shalish b'Torah shebichtav, 1/3 or 1 part of the day, of the time that he spends studying Torah, is to be spent studying Torah shebichtav, which you may have learned before, but again, you have to be constantly revising and seeing it again, and it has to be shanun b'ficha. It has to be on the tip of your tongue. The other section, shalish b'Torah she'ba'al peh, which is the study of the Torah she'ba'al peh, the oral tradition, which is summed up in the Mishneh, shall we say. Ushlish yavin uyaskil aharith davar mireshitho. And the third part is, as Rambam is about to explain, what we call Talmud. But Rambam defines this concept here, and he says, Shalish yavin uyaskil aharith davar mireshitho. In other words, to extrapolate from that which you do know to things that you do not yet know. You have studied certain principles, and then you understand from those principles, you by delving into them and examining and gaining greater understanding, then you learn and understand further other things. You gain other insights and more information. We see davar midavar. You learn one thing from another. We yadameh davar davar, and you can compare This is one of the essential ways of comparing and arriving at conclusions in halakha by comparing one situation or one concept to another. And all of this together really is the midot shatran nidreshat bahem, mentioned in the famous Beretha in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, the Shlosh Esrei Midot. Ad sheyeda he'achu ikar midot, so that a person, until one achieves an understanding of why the halakha is this way, why the Mishnah states what it states, on what is that based, on what, and learning on what insight, on what kind of darisha. The word lidrosh, midrash, comes from the shoresh darash. Darash means to investigate. The pasuk says, you shall investigate and look into the matter thoroughly. Midrash is studying the Torah in depth and learning from what you see there in very concise and telegraphic form, understanding a great deal more. So knowing why the halakha, why the Torah Ba'al Peh states X, Y, or Z, knowing where this comes from in the Torah Shebichtav, understanding that process, that is the third part of studying Torah, the third section. To know how one arrives at this conclusion of knowing what is correct, what is mutar, what is asur, what is forbidden. In other words, to more fully understand the things that you received as a tradition which was not fully explained to you at first, which is what we find in the Mishnah. The Mishnah, also known as halachot, the famous Beretha Tana, Devei Eliyahu, Kol HaShoneh halachot. The word halachot there means Mishnah. In other words, that which the Mishnah is made up of these halachot. So all those things that you learn, mipi hashmu'a. Mipi hashmu'a means the tradition, in other words, the oral tradition, the Torah Ba'al Peh. And that is what we refer to, this type of study, in-depth study, Drisha wa Hakira, investigation and extrapolation and understanding things from the beginning to end, from the source of the matter to the end product. That is called Talmud. So we have these three sections, these three parts of Talmud Torah. We have Torah Shebichtav, we have Torah and the Torah Ba'al Peh, and we have the Talmud, which is understanding both of those previous categories. And Rambam continues, Kesad, Haya Ba'al Umanuf. For example, if a person was some kind of tradesman, artisan, what have you, let's say he's a shoemaker, وهي عساك بملخا 3 شعوت بيوم, and he studies Torah. He works at his trade, at his job. There is also a Girsa instead of وهي عساك, هي عساك بملخا. It doesn't make any difference really. It means that the norm would be to study. To work 3 hours a day, 3 شعوت بيوم. Uva Torah Tesha, and 9 hours a day could be spent on the Torah. That gives you an idea of what we should be aiming for. Many people would say that today it's very difficult to imagine such a situation, and that is true. And that tells you a lot about what is right and what is not quite so right about the world in which we live. And there are many, many reasons for that. But basically, when the organizing principle of a society is economic growth and the workplace, and that these essentially become almost all of a person's waking, all of what a person does during his waking hours, this does not lead to a healthy society, and certainly does not lead to a Torah-based society. And that does mean, of course, that the Jewish people must consider how to organize a Jewish society, a Jewish country in the present age based on these principles. And that is a very broad and a very deep discussion. For now, we continue with the Rambam. Rambam says, so therefore a person, let's say, works 3 hours a day, and that is sufficient for his needs, for his family's needs, and he has 9 hours in which he can study Torah. 3 of those hours he spends studying Torah shebichtav, and 3 studying Torah she'ba'al peh, which we explained is the Mishneh, the Baratot, etc., the basic information, which is also basically what we have here in the Mishneh Torah. The Mishneh Torah is like studying Mishnah, because it is giving you in very concise form, without all the background and all the understanding that is required to fully fathom why things are as they are, and how to deal with a new reality or a new question. That already is Talmud. Mishnah is Torah she'ba'al peh in its simplest form, is just knowing what the Torah she'ba'al peh states. So that's 3 hours should be spent on that. And for 3 hours, he should delve into the Torah in great depth. The Torah she'ba'al bichtav, the Torah she'ba'al peh. With Ivrei Kabbalah, which refers to the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, the prophets and the other writings in the Tanakh, Bichlal Torah shebichtavim, they are considered part of the Torah shebichtav. When we speak about Torah shebichtav, it includes all of the Tanakh, Uferushan, and the various perushim that we have on those texts of the Torah shebichtav are part of the Torah she'ba'al peh. That which Rambam discussed in Hilchot Yesodei Torah, which have to do with I don't necessarily like the term Jewish philosophy, but the intention is that the idea here is understanding the philosophical, ideological, and spiritual underpinnings of the Torah. That is what Rambam is referring to here. They are part of the Talmud. In other words, when you come to divide your time to study Torah, you should be able to fit all the various areas of the Torah into one of these 3 categories, according to what we just discussed here. When is this, in which situation is this the case? That which we just described here. B'med devarim amurim, says Rambam, which is halakha tet well now. B'tchilat talmudo shel adam. This is true when a person is younger, when he is still, shall we say, in the beginning of his Torah career. Aval keshe yavdil b'chokhmah, when a person becomes the more he learns and understands. When a person has achieved the point, has got to the point where he is familiar with the Torah shebichtav, the entire Tanakh, and the entire Mishneh, he will not need to study these things constantly, but you do have to review them and do hazara, the shanen, to repeat constantly. That is necessary, as we explained, otherwise you will forget. Yikra be'itim mezumanim Torah shebichtav with divrei hashmu'ah. Divrei hashmu'ah is the Torah she'ba'al peh, the Mishnah, which is summed up in the Mishnah. So you spend some time regularly, daily, studying those things, reviewing a certain section of Torah shebichtav, Torah she'ba'al peh, the Mishnah, kedei shelo yishkach davar midivrei Torah, so that one will not forget that which one has already learned, and that everything should be at your fingertips. But most of his time will be able to spend to the in-depth study of various aspects of the Torah. According to his understanding and his wisdom, his abilities. This Perush of Rambam is not just Rambam's opinion by any means. In other words, this idea of Le'olam Yishalesh Adam Talmudo, that it means that every day is to be divided into 3 sections, is something which appears also in Midrash Tehillim, for example. It talks about Chachamim, Talmidei Chachamim, who divide their time on a daily basis into various sections. This appears in the Geonim, and Rabbeinu Hananel and Rabbeinu Tam, and other Rishonim, and also the Rambam, as we just saw, understand that statement in Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Lamed, in that way. There are other Rishonim, led by Rashi, and there are a number of Rishonim who agree with Rashi's interpretation, who say what it says, Le'olam Yishalesh Adam Talmudo, does not mean on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. Rashi explains that 2 days a week Mikra, 2 days a week Tarsha Ba'al Peh, Mishneh, 2 days a week Talmud, which leaves the question, what do you do on the 7th day? So the answer apparently is that you review everything you studied during the week. This is what they used to do in Shivat Volozhin, not in terms of the Shilush, but in terms of studying Talmud. They used to, the order was supposed to be that you learned a daf a day for 6 days, and on Shabbat you did Chazara on all those dafim. So there is another pirush different from that which we just saw in the Rambam, but for a number of reasons is I think quite clear that this pirush that is to be done on a daily basis was the original intention and the correct interpretation, and this is also what appears. The Shulchan Aruch, for example, in Hilchot Talmud Torah in Yoreh De'ah, quotes literally word for word what Rambam writes here. We shall end here for today. Ayu beruchim hizku ve'ames levarchem kol hamiyahalim ladunai.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.